Hey everyone, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Bradley Martin. I'm here on the Kindful team, and I'm super excited to be joined by Stephen Shattuck, the Chief Engagement Officer over at Bloomerang. And Stephen today is going to talk to us about the current state of donor retention and what fundraisers can do about it. Stephen, thanks for joining us.
Sure.
Yeah. A couple quick housekeeping notes, and then I'm going to just hand it off to Stephen and let him take it away from there. Number one is, as always, this session is being recorded today, and in a few hours after the session is over, we'll be sending you out the recording along with the slides. So you don't need to feel like you have to take feverish notes to keep up with the information, or if you see something here that you want to share with a board member or someone else like that, all the information will be sent to you afterwards. In addition, Stephen loves to answer questions. So if you have questions throughout, just go ahead and drop those in to the, if you look over on your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a questions tab. Go ahead and expand that and just drop your questions in as you have them. And so you don't have to wait till the end necessarily to ask questions. And then Stephen will take some time at the end or maybe throughout, but to go through and just kind of look at those questions and try to answer as many, I'm sure, as he possibly can with the time that's allotted. And so without further ado, Stephen, I'll just let you take it away from there.
Cool. Thanks, Bradley. Thanks for having me and everybody over at Kindful. This is super fun for me to get to talk to this crew. And thanks to all of you for hanging out. I think we had close to 1,000 registrants. We got a few hundred in here. So I really appreciate you all taking an hour out of your day. I know it's valuable time, but we'll try to have some fun. I got some cool stuff for you concerning not just retention, but donor communications. We're going to talk about lots of cool things we'll cover here over the next hour. But yeah, feel free to ask questions. I love it. I can see them as they come in. If I don't answer it right away, I may get to some if I see something really pressing, but I'm not ignoring you. We'll have plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So don't be shy. So a little bit about me, like Bradley said, I work over here at Bloomerang. Basically, my job is to do things like this, to do a lot of research, talking to customers, fundraisers, consultants. I also do some volunteer work with some other groups doing research, which is something I'm going to lean heavily on in this presentation for sure. But you've come to the right place if you are interested in retention, because we just got, literally 24 hours ago, the new donor retention study from FEP, from the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. So I actually gave this webinar earlier today to a real small group of fundraisers, but you all are some of the first people to get kind of a guided tour of some of the findings from the 2020 retention report. But if you aren't familiar already with FEP, with the retention study, or with donor retention in general, I'll kind of set the table really quickly. FEP is a really cool organization that was founded back in 2005, 2006, I believe. So we've been going about 15 years here. And it started as a really cool collaboration between AFP and the Urban Institute, and has now expanded to lots of different partners that are all contributing to this project. And what the project is we are collecting data, anonymized data, from many of the leading donor management providers. So Bloomerang being one of them, Donor Perfect, Neon. So you may know those products or maybe even use them yourself. Hopefully next year we'll get the Kindful data included as well. And what FEP does is we basically crunch all of those numbers and release a report every single year, which usually comes out in the first quarter of the new year, that looks at the retention rates from the previous calendar year. So what this report does, I'm going to show you, the 2020 report, is looking at, okay, what percentage of people who gave in 2019 also came back and gave again in 2020, with some various nuances that we'll get into in different ways of kind of slicing that data. But it's a pretty big data set, even though there are, it's not every donor database provider out there, but it is over 20,000 organizations and around $80 billion in transactions that are being crunched here since 2005. So it's a pretty good picture at where we stand in terms of donor retention. So again, the percentage of people who have given and then come back in the following year and give again. And like I said, this 2020 report just came out yesterday, so really excited to kind of unveil the results. And I've been involved with this since about 2012, and I can honestly say that this report, this set of data, is one of the more unique reports that FEP has put out, which probably won't surprise you given how interesting of a year 2020 was. So let's dive into the results. So we know now that the average donor retention rate for the sector is around 43.5%. So what this is saying is that about 44% of the donors who gave in 2019 came back again and gave in 2020. And I'll show you how that has changed over the years, not just in this year, but for the most part, that retention rate has stayed pretty steady. It's in the 45s, the 44s, 47, 42, but in general, it's in that kind of low to mid 40th percentile range, right? It's kind of like that 2% of GDP that comes out for charitable giving. Doesn't really change much year over year, maybe a little bit of vacillation from one year to the next. But in general, the sector is retaining about 42 to 45% of its donors from one year to the next. But what's really interesting that we look at in the report is the retention rates among different types of donors. So that average rate is every donor type, every organization type, every gift channel, online, offline, event, direct mail, $5, $1,000, it's everybody. But what is really interesting and something we're going to spend a lot of time on over the next hour or so is the retention rates among different types of donors specifically. And I want to draw your attention to that middle bucket, which is the first time rate. So this is the percentage of people who give a second gift, essentially. So only about 19%. And again, this rate is usually around 20%. Goes up and down, every single year, changes a little bit, but in general, we're around 20%. So 8 out of 10 first-time donors do not come back and give again and give a second time to our organizations, which is kind of a big problem, right? It's a pretty low retention rate, and that can generate or represent, I should say, a lot of lost ROI if we don't get that second gift. But you can see that if we can get multiple gifts from people, those retention rates really increase. They more than triple to about 60%. And again, this rate is usually around 60%. So even though all three of these rates fell very slightly, about 1 to 2 percentage points compared to last year's report, in general, they're pretty much in the ballpark of where they normally are, no matter what year you look at, 45%, 20%, 60%. And just to kind of show you the trend line there, looking at that average retention rate over the past 5 years, pretty much, again, around 45%. It was as high as 47, and now it's actually on kind of a 5-year low at 43%, but not any huge swings or huge changes here. We're basically in that 45th percentile, but it did go down, definitely worth mentioning, definitely worth talking about and looking at, but wasn't a huge swing, and I would probably anticipate it maybe rebounding a little next year, especially since we're coming out of the pandemic and the economy is recovering to some extent. So that was the bad news, that all three of those core retention metrics kind of went down 1 or 2%, but there were a lot of good things that were highlighted in this report. And by the way, all you got to do is go to afpfep.org to download the full report. I'm just going to kind of zoom through some of the top level findings. Good news is that we had more donors and donations in terms of dollars raised and I think in any report that we had seen prior from one year to the next. So a lot of people did step up during the pandemic, during 2020, during kind of a tough year. Even though the economy wasn't doing very well, even though we had to cancel or go virtual on events, and our service offerings were perhaps changed or diminished in some ways, people did seem to respond to the increased need, which made me feel good to see this. I wasn't too terribly surprised to see this when I saw it on Sunday night when I got the first look at it. Mostly because, we have been hearing stories at Kindful, Bloomerang, of just a lot of organizations having really great years in 2020. And I think it's because they were proactive and reaching out to people, explaining the need, and really not being afraid to ask for that help, even though it was kind of a tough time. Not only that, but among those donors, a lot of small dollar donors also stepped up and really made a difference during 2020. Again, these were percentage increases that we had not seen, I don't think at all. I'd have to look back at every single, all 15 or 16 reports, but certainly in the last few years that I can remember, really big increases here. So I really want this to be encouraging to you watching and listening to this, which is to say there is a lot of generosity out there. There is still a lot of capacity out there, even though the economy is still trying to recover. And all you have to do in many cases is ask for that help. I think people will respond to that need. So that's kind of what we saw in 2020. And again, your mileage may vary. This report does not differentiate between organization types. So, how did an arts organization do versus an animal welfare? We don't really have that level of detail. It's just kind of an average, kind of a signpost where you can sort of compare your own numbers to that national average. But and again, this is kind of interesting to look at from one year to the next. But I just want to hammer home that in general, those three retention rates for average of all donors, first-time donors, and repeat frequent donors really tends to be right around 45%, 20%, and 60% respectively, no matter what year you're looking at. Again, the retention rates haven't really changed over the last 2 decades. I don't really expect them to change very much. I think we're kind of locked into the way our society runs here, at least in the United States, in terms of philanthropic giving. So the question now is, how can we overachieve? How can we maybe have higher than average retention rates? But I think that 45, 20, and 60 number is kind of a good benchmark to compare yourself to, no matter what those individual years reports say. But I did want to show you this data to hopefully encourage you and to show that there are a lot of people out there who still want to help and are able to help by contributing, especially those small dollar donors. Those people giving 10 bucks, 30 bucks. Don't ignore those people. They may still really like you, even though they're not giving those mega gifts that tend to make the news when it happens. So that's where we're at, right? 45% average retention rate, 20% on the first time side. And then if you can get multiple gifts, it really goes higher, up to 60%. So I think the next logical question is, why are we at these rates, right? Why is it that over the past 15 years, it basically hasn't changed that much? Well, we do have some really interesting research. Not only do we have these snapshots of kind of the current state of things, but we also have a lot of really interesting research that goes into basically donor psychology. Why do people keep giving? Why do people stop contributing to nonprofits? And what actions can we take to maybe mitigate some of those reasons that we see reported in these donor loyalty studies? Now, there are a lot of donor loyalty studies, and I've only got an hour with you. I've already burned through about 15 minutes of it. So I'm going to kind of cherry pick, just to be totally honest with you, some of my favorite studies that I kind of look to because they're actionable, sort of easy to digest, and not get too discouraged by the findings in them. But I would encourage you to look to other sources of donor loyalty research, because I think what you'll see is that for the most part, they all typically come to the same conclusions. And I'm gonna kind of outline what I think those conclusions are based at least on what I've seen. And then we'll talk about some ways you can kind of reverse engineer those findings into some action items for your own nonprofit. So where you're gonna leave with some real tangible takeaways by the 4 o'clock Eastern hour. So I think the first place to look is, okay, why do people stop giving? What, that 55% of people that doesn't give again in the following year, why does that happen? It seems kind of strange, right? You attract a donor, you convince them to give to you. Why do they suddenly stop? And why do they stop at such kind of a high rate, more than half? Well, we've got research on this, like I said. The one that I like to go to first is a little older. So if you're bristling at that 2001 date, don't worry, we're going to move kind of forward through time with more contemporary research. I think you'll see again that basically the reasons for giving or not giving haven't really changed too much, and you get a lot of very similar responses despite different data sets. But I like this one to start. It was kind of the first major, I would say, look at donor retention. And it was conducted by this gentleman you see here on the screen, Adrian Sargent. He's like the godfather of donor retention, honestly. He's a hero of mine. He's been looking at donor retention long before FEP was ever founded. And this study in particular was done before FEP was started. And what he did is that he reached out to some very large nonprofits here in the US, so like household name nonprofits, big ones. And the idea was that they had a large list of lapsed donors just by nature of having been around for so many years with the high volume of fundraising that they're doing. And what Dr. Sargent did is surveyed all of those lapsed donors and basically asked them one simple question, which is, hey, why did you stop giving, right? It's kind of a novel question. You know, we were giving, they had convinced you to donate. What happened? Why did you suddenly stop? I'm going to kind of zoom through kind of the top level responses that were given. But again, I would encourage you to read the whole report if you are really interested in the topic. It's kind of a meaty one. But these were sort of the most frequently received responses from these lapsed donors. And you got enough to have a statistically relevant study. So I think they are kind of worth, you know, internalizing a bit. And I know they don't all add up to 100% because people could give multiple answers and kind of similar answers were kind of combined. But as we go through these, you know, I encourage you to think about, okay, what is, you know, what is mitigatable by us? What is controllable by us? What are some things that we maybe can't do anything about? And among the things that we can control, you know, what are some ways that maybe we could start to act a little differently to kind of convince people that this isn't a problem for our organizations. So kind of interesting, especially the top four. The top four, I think, are things that are pretty actionable by us as fundraisers. 5% of the respondees said that, well, they didn't think that the organization was really in need of their gifts. So maybe they weren't receiving appeals anymore, or the appeals they were sending weren't, you know, hitting the mark. They weren't super compelling to the recipient, and so those people just stopped giving entirely. 8%, and this is a concept we're going to talk about for a couple more times over the next hour, is those donors stopped giving because they didn't receive any information from the nonprofits that they were contributing to of how those gifts were spent, right? Donors kind of see their gifts as a little bit of an investment in the, not just the organization, but in the community or whatever cause that is being helped. And they want to know, okay, you know, who are the animals being adopted? What is the progress on the research towards that disease that you're trying to cure? You know, what is the updates on this project, this water well in Africa that you're doing? The more you can tell those stories, and you're going to see this a lot in some other subsequent research we're going to talk about, it's so good for donor retention. I mean, it gets donors feeling like, wow, they're really making a difference out in the world. So the kinds of things that you're probably putting like in your newsletter, or maybe you are doing videos about for that end of year gala or something like that, keep telling those stories. Don't wait for those things, those regularly occurring things. You know, put them in your thank you letters, put them in your appeals, put them out on social media. Donors can't get enough of those success stories. And we're going to talk about some examples of how you can do that too. 9% didn't even remember supporting, which is interesting. And I always go to the next one immediately, which is they never got thanked. Perhaps if they had gotten thanked, they would have remembered, right? That's a big percent. 13% never got thanked at all. Now, they may have gotten thanked and just not remembered it, but regardless, it doesn't really matter. If they didn't remember it or noticed, it's the same as not getting thanked at all. So this concept of thanking and reporting on outcomes, this storytelling piece, if you do nothing else other than maybe spend a little bit more time on those two concepts, honestly, I feel very confident that your retention rates are going to improve. So we're going to talk a lot about how to do that specifically, because as you go through the rest of the answers or the response reasons, a lot of them not much we can do about, right? 16% had passed away. They found that out by doing some sort of data analysis on the list, but something to keep in mind, right? It may speak to the average age of our donors, it may speak to the importance of keeping our database data clean and up to date, right? So that we're not appealing people who are never going to respond because they have passed away, or maybe annoying a surviving family member or household member whose loved one had passed away and now they're still getting mail to those people. So something to keep in mind for sure. A little over half said that they could no longer afford the gift, which is always the top reason, right? Any donor loyalty study you're going to look at, I think you'll find that that is the top reason. And again, not something we can do much about, but poor service or communication, thinking the charity didn't need them, thinking others are more deserving. A lot can be done here in terms of the quality of the appeals, which we're going to talk about, the speed and quality of the thank you. Hopefully you get it out there at all, but also doing things like personalization and contextualization. We're going to talk about those things. And then the storytelling. Now, you're not going to get to 100% retention. That is not the goal of this presentation at all. And I don't want anybody to be discouraged by that, but can we outperform 45%? I think so. We see that amongst Kindful customers. We see that amongst Bloomerang customers. I have talked to people who don't use either of those programs who are able to achieve those rates. And if you can go from 45% to 50%, 52%, even from 45 to 46%, that can mean a lot of extra revenue from those retained donors over the lifetime of their giving. So I think the goal here is, can you beat that average, or can you get an increase over your current retention rate? And if you focus on storytelling, thanking, that reporting piece, I think you can do it. And that can be honestly transformative for your organization. Don't set yourself some goal of 70% retention or 90% retention. I think that's what leads to discouragement. But can you get to a small increase by maybe focusing on some of these things? Yeah, definitely possible. So that's why donors leave. What about why donors stay? What about those organizations, like I said, that have higher than average retention rates? What are those folks doing to kind of sustain those numbers? And more importantly, what are their donors saying for what those organizations are doing well? And that's a question that this study by the Donor Voice sought to answer back in 2011. And it's interesting as we look at the results of this study that it almost exactly mirrors, it's almost the exact other side of the coin from Adrian Sargent's research, which was 10 years prior, different nonprofits, different donors, but basically people give and don't give for about the same reasons. But let's dive into this one because it's interesting. And by the way, check out the Donor Voice. They do some really cool research. They've got tons of research on their website beyond just the retention topic. But I like this one because it gives very tangible and actionable tactical things that fundraisers can do to improve retention and loyalty among their donors. So the methodology here was they surveyed around 1,200 super loyal donors. So people that have been giving to this cohort of nonprofits for many years in a row, frequent gifts within a year, not just one gift every single year, but frequent giving, upgrades. There were some other signals that were kind of boiled into that, but basically super loyal, kind of cream of the crop donors, the kind of donors that we all wish we had, right? Why do they do that? Why do they give to these organizations? They asked them that. Actually, they gave them a list of 32 reasons and said, hey, rank these. What resonates the most with you? And these are the top 7 reasons that these loyal donors gave for why they keep giving. And again, it's almost the exact opposite responses from Adrian Sargent's study. So you're going to kind of see some of these same elements or concepts come up here. But let's go through them because, again, if you print like any slide from this presentation, this is the one. Send it to your board, tape it all over your office whenever you get back to the office if you aren't there already, because this is your North Star for retention. And if you do these 7 things, or if you do a couple of these 7 things even, I think you will see some improvements to your retention rates. Now, These are not easy things to do. And in many cases, they will require kind of a shift in thinking and maybe a different mentality from what we have prioritized in our organization prior to. But I think it will generate results if you carve out some time to do some of these things. They are kind of simple concepts. I don't think they'll surprise you any of these things will surprise you to hear. Maybe a couple of them will, but we're going to dive into each, and I'll show you examples, I think, of all 7 of them as we go through it. So the number one thing speaks to that storytelling aspect that I told you. The donor thinks that your organization is effective. Now, I have no doubt that all 300 of you watching live and however many of you watching the recording, you're an effective organization. I mean, you wouldn't be around if you weren't. But does the donor know that? Are you telling those stories back to the donor and making them feel like, yeah, my gifts are definitely making a difference in the world. I'm really making changes out there in the community. So telling those stories and thank you letters, of course, in your newsletter, but tell them, separate from those things. Tell them just to tell them, in emails, stewardship pieces, social media. You cannot tell these stories enough. It will get them hooked on the giving, and it will give them a greater appreciation for all the great work you do, for sure. Now, number 2 is interesting, and we're going to look at some specific ways to mitigate this one, but donors don't like to be caught off guard by anything that you send them. So one very tangible thing you can do for this one, it's kind of high on the list, so I think it's worth talking about, is that everything you send should include some sort of preview or heads up on what it is they're going to get next. So imagine you send a thank you letter to a brand new donor. It's the first gift. Hey, welcome. We're so glad to have you. You're sending a welcome kit. In that letter, you might want to tell them, by the way, we're going to send you our newsletter every month or every quarter or however you send it. Or be on the lookout for whatever. You could write a little handwritten note in that letter that says, by the way, we got an event coming up, be on the lookout for that. Anytime you can tell a donor kind of what's coming next, they'll be ready for it, but more importantly, they won't be caught off guard or maybe even alienated by what it is you're sending. And there is a possibility that you can alienate people with those subsequent communications. For example, if you are not honoring communication preferences, somebody tells you, I don't want to get direct mail, you send them direct mail, that's kind of where this second one boils in. Gift amounts, if you're asking for inappropriate gift amounts, if somebody has been giving you 5 figures a year for many years and you suddenly ask them to join your monthly giving program that starts at $12 a month, that may not be received very well. So this really boils down to segmentation. We're going to talk about segmentation here in a little while, but are you talking to different types of donors differently based on who they are, why they give, what they give, and when they give, how often they give? But we'll talk about that one. 3, probably won't surprise you, donors want to be thanked, right? We saw that 13% or so of people not giving because they were never thanked. But beyond just thanking them, the speed of the gift acknowledgement has been shown to be a driver of retention. You cannot thank donors fast enough. Even 24 to 48 hours after giving if you can, same day if you can. And I'll show you some other kind of corroborating research that really drills down into what that time frame specifically should be. Are you getting to know your donors? Are you surveying them? Are you asking them questions? Not only do donors like to be asked, but if they answer, and they like to be asked even if they do not answer, but if they answer and they give you good information about them or feedback on what it is that you're sending or doing, you can change your efforts. You can further personalize the communications to those people. So you can get some really valuable information out of surveying donors, but we'll talk about surveying here in a minute too. And then the bottom 3, honestly, I could have stopped there because the concepts kind of start to repeat, right? Donor feels like they're part of an important cause, an effective cause. Well, it's a little more nuanced. Not only do they think you're effective and important because you're telling these great stories, but they feel like they're part of that fight, right? They're right there in the trenches with you. So donor centricity, this is kind of a buzzword we see a lot in webinars like this and blog posts and things, but it's important, making donors not just feel like this ATM off in the corner that's just sending money and there's a lot of separation between you and them, but they're also a change agent. Now, you can go overboard with this, right? You can get into donor worship, which is not good. and you don't want to be too donor centric to, the detriment of your service recipients and your employees. But I think there are ways to be donor centric in equitable ways, and we'll talk about those things. And then appreciation, and then receiving information about who's being helped. So again, the thanking, and again, the storytelling. So thanking, reporting, segmenting your communications, which we'll talk about, and then getting to know your donors, being a little curious about them and about how they feel about you. So let's kind of reverse engineer all those things. It's a lot of heady concepts, and I want to give you some tangible takeaways in the final half hour here. But we're definitely going to focus on, okay, how do we communicate to these donors differently based on who they are? And we'll let the retention rates guide us, right? It's logical. Brand new donors who have a 20% retention rate probably want to do something different with them than maybe people who are giving multiple times a year, that you have a strong relationship with. Are we segmenting those communications and saying different things to those people? We'll talk about thanking, storytelling, surveying, and definitely being donor centric as kind of an overarching theme amongst all of those communications. But I think the very first thing that's kind of the low hanging fruit is that segmentation piece, this idea of, okay, we're going to talk to different donors differently based on what kind of donor they are, or if they're not a donor, what kind of prospect they are perhaps. And it's a long word, it's multi-syllabic, it's kind of a mouthful, but basically all we're talking about here is personas or audiences for content. A segment is the same as an audience, is the same as a persona. So those words are kind of interchangeable. So let me show you a segmentation strategy that is something that's in use right now amongst a nonprofit that has really high retention rates and is doing some great things. And you can basically steal this rubric. I think it's repeatable for pretty much any type of nonprofit. You just need to fill in those cells in a different way. But this is my buddy Heather. She's one of my favorite customers. She's like the queen of segmentation. I think it's like her goal in life to break Bloomerang with all these segments. If anybody's going to do it, it's going to be her. And they're a school foundation. They're a public school foundation up in New York State. And basically their strategy is, hey, we got a lot of different types of people who give to us. We should communicate to them differently. So their audiences are kind of interesting. They're a school foundation, so they have people with kids in the district who give, so parents, grandparents, things like that. They have people who live in the district in Skaneateles but don't send kids to school because they don't have kids, or they're too old or too young, or they go somewhere else. Just those two audiences right there represent a very different case for support, right? So if you were in that parent group, you may get a letter that says, hey, Natalie, as the mother of a second grader in the school district, the value of the education we're providing. I want to give you the chance to make that happen for the next generation. Versus someone else who doesn't have kids, who may get a letter there that says, dear Stephen, we are the public school foundation here in the city you live in. You probably don't want to live in a town with bad schools. Can you help us out? And I'm not a great copywriter, as you can see, but I think you can see kind of the angle you might want to take with those different audiences. And they don't stop there. They've got alumni, which has a different case for support, and not a wildly different case for support, but it's mostly just kind of that lead in, kind of introducing yourself, and most importantly, and this will get you there, is telling the donor what kind of donor they are in that letter. Donors kind of like to hear that. It shows that you're paying attention, but it will also help you craft the rest of that case for support. If you start with the audience, right? This is an age-old writing trick. I think that will help you in the act of actually creating those appeals, or whatever it is you're saying, thank you notes, newsletters, stewardship pieces. But not only do they have the personas or the people types, they also look at, okay, has this person ever given before? No, they're a complete prospect. Has this person given once but not twice? Are they a lapsed donor? Do they give every single year like clockwork? Are they a monthly donor? And all of those different types get different types of communication, mostly that just address them as that type. Dear Natalie, as a monthly donor, you're literally keeping the lights on. Thank you so much. by the way, we need a new roof for our gymnasium. Would you be willing to chip in a little bit more? Versus if they took a one-size-fits-all approach, right, and everybody got the same appeal letter, it couldn't possibly speak to, even if you hired the best copywriter in the world, which would get you pretty far, to be honest, but it wouldn't have the impact of that very specific and contextualized communication for all those people. So this is my challenge to you. And if you start anywhere, make it those brand new donors, right? If you're doing a welcome kit, or if you have a thank you letter that only goes to brand new donors, boom, you're doing segmentation. But don't stop there. Something for monthly donors, maybe the persona types, maybe corporate sponsors, community members who may give for different reasons. Grab a whiteboard, get your team involved, order a pizza or two, and I think it could be kind of a fun exercise and maybe helpful in getting you to communicate to these people in a way that maybe makes more sense for who they are. I think that will have a good lift in retention. Then the other thing I would recommend is reaching out personally. So, in other donor loyalty studies, and Penelope Burke's study that comes out every year is a really good example of this, where she's talking to donors, and there's always several stories about a donor who was motivated by personal outreach, right? Somebody called them, somebody wrote them a nice handwritten note, and that made the difference. And we at Bloomerang, we'd always kind of seen these anecdotes kind of floating around presentations and blog posts and things, but we were curious, does it actually make a difference? So right around the time the pandemic started, we started to look at, hey, does it matter if organizations are calling donors, writing emails, and logging those personal interactions that may be done over webcams, maybe in person outside if it's safe? And what we found is that our customers who were calling donors were way outperforming the organizations who weren't calling donors. But not only that, they were outperforming themselves from the previous year, from 2019. Same with personal emails. So this is a one-to-one email, mind you. This is, Stephen writing a letter or writing an email to Bradley, not a MailChimp, not an email blast, but like literally opening up Outlook, opening up Gmail, and just writing that email to one person. And then in-person interactions. So Zoom calls, webinars like this, live streams, something where you're talking kind of face-to-face. Even if it was virtual, that's okay. We didn't differentiate there. So, in a year of social distancing, of social isolation, we're all stuck at home. I think nonprofits, we have a real distinct advantage over our for-profit counterparts to really be reaching out, saying thank you, telling these stories, checking in with people, making sure they're doing okay. It doesn't just have to be about our organizations. So if you aren't doing some kind of segmentation, and if you don't have at least some time carved out for personal one-to-one outreach, make time for it. I think those are probably the two best things you can do for retention. If you get a brand new donor or a brand new monthly donor, yeah, they'll probably get a form letter from you, or maybe that auto response email from your website. But don't be afraid to pick up the phone if you get their phone number. If you don't get their phone number, write them a nice email saying, hey, thanks for joining the family. We can't wait to show you all the great things you're going to make possible. Videos, we've seen a huge increase in the amount of one-to-one kind of disposable videos where you're just grabbing your cell phone or your webcam and shooting a quick 30-40 second video that says, hey, Stephen, just want to say thanks for being a donor. Want to tell you a quick story. Want to give you a name and a face that you can reach out to anytime. These things really have a good lift on retention, especially that first time rate. It's so low. 8 out of 10 donors. It's absolutely abysmal. And again, you're not going to get to 80, 90, 100% retention, but can you get to 30 or 40? That can really be transformational for your organization, because those people are going to be giving for much longer once you kind of got them into the cycle of giving. And who knows, they could upgrade, they could become a major donor, a monthly donor, planned giving donor. You never know where those great things are going to start, but they do start with a second gift at a minimum. And we looked at our customers that had kind of higher than average retention rates. They were kind of bucking that 20% trend. okay, what are they doing? What are some of the touch points they put in those first 90 days? And probably won't surprise you to find that phone calls had a big lift, especially if you could call those people very quickly. Now, if you don't get a phone number, don't go looking for a phone number or calling their office, trying to find them. That's okay. But that's a great excuse to send an email, a video, even a handwritten note. But do it quickly, right? Because we saw from all that research, donors want to be thanked quickly, and there's no better donor type to really kick things off on a good footing than those first-time donors. Surveying them, right? They're brand new donors. We don't know them. We don't really know why they gave necessarily. May know a little bit if they gave to a certain fund, perhaps. But hey, thanks so much for giving. By the way, how did you find us? What's your connection to the cause? Why are you passionate about clean water in Africa? Why do you care about the wildlife population outside Toronto? Like whatever that thing is, ask them. And if they don't answer, that's okay. You're probably going to get less than a 10% response on those things. But that 10% that does respond to you, they're going to get good information that you can hopefully use in subsequent communications. But they're also kind of self-selecting into a more engaged group, right? Just by nature of responding to that survey. And then the last thing I would recommend is some kind of tour for a brand new donor. Maybe some of you are already doing this. That's great. Do it virtually if that's the safest option. But if they can see your mission in action or hear from someone, maybe a service recipient or some kind of expert in the field, that's really going to go a long way to helping them understand all the great work you do. And then, yeah, they're probably going to get your newsletter over the course of those 90 days. But we also found, which is interesting, that there was kind of a honeymoon period, kind of a window of opportunity for people to give that second gift. So don't be afraid to ask again, even within those first 90 days. It may seem aggressive, may seem kind of quick, but again, if you've done a good job welcoming them, saying thank you, telling them some stories, and maybe getting to know them, that second ask can be a little bit more contextual, maybe a little more personalized, and more likely to kind of entice them to give again. Now, the phone calls, not just our data, but there's a lot of other people who've kind of reported the efficacy of phone calls. If board members call brand new donors, if you call donors quickly, lift in retention, and these kind of stats, they kind of float around blog posts and presentations like these. But we put it to the test kind of scientifically at Bloomerang. We looked at our customers who called brand new donors versus the ones who don't call brand new donors. We did this in January 2020, so it's about a year old, but I showed you that pandemic research with the phone calls, so I don't think there's any danger of the efficacy of new donor phone calls going away. But higher retention rates, right? So the baseline was kind of 33%, but we saw people getting up towards the 60s if they were calling brand new donors to say thank you, for a survey, for a heads up, to tell a story, some kind of stewardship purpose, not necessarily an ask, but mostly to say thank you. And by the way, we did not differentiate between live pickups and voicemails. So voicemails, probably most of these people are going to go to voicemail, right? Most people just kind of screen their calls, especially if it's from an unknown number. That's okay. Voicemails are great, and I think it will stand out because not many people get thank you phone calls or thank you voicemails. But bottom line was higher retention rates for brand new donors. Also, those donors who gave a second gift gave faster on average if they did get these phone calls than people who did give again but weren't called. So it took almost like 3/4 of a year for that second gift versus 60 days or less if they got more than one phone call. So you get that money faster, which is good. So you go from that 20% to 60% retention rate right away, and also higher gift amounts, about double on average from people who did give again but didn't get that stewardship phone call or calls, I should say. So this is a great activity. You run a report in Bloomerang and Kindful and Razor's Edge, whatever the heck you're using. Even if you're using Excel, who are brand new donors that have given this week or this month or today, if you have a lower gift volume, if you can get to those, and add that column for phone numbers, and the people who gave you phone numbers, call them. carve out a half hour on Fridays, get your board members involved. It doesn't just have to be you. Board members are great people to call these donors and say thanks. 30 seconds a call, a voicemail tops. I think you can get to a lot of these people maybe quicker than you thought you could. And you may actually have fun doing it. Talked a little bit about welcome kits. So again, if you're doing this, you're doing segmentation, something that only brand new donors get, something that maybe invites them in for a tour, something that includes a little handwritten signature, handwritten note, just to kind of show them, hey, we didn't just spit this out of the printer in 5 seconds and send it along its way. We took some time. Maybe paper clip something, a little brochure or a photo of a service recipient, but mostly you're saying welcome, welcome to the family of donors. Can't wait to get to know you. We can't wait to tell these stories. Kind of think that future tense language, right? Thinking of that research. Going to tell you stories. We want to get to know you. Anytime you have questions, reach out. We want to hear from you. Extend all those invitations. This is a nice one I got where they had sent me the previous print newsletter. They did a quarterly print newsletter, and I was kind of giving off cycle, so they didn't want me to wait 2 months for that next one. They said, hey, here's our latest print newsletter, just to kind of give you a quick update about what we've been doing. And then, of course, the handwritten signature, the handwritten note. But you don't have to just stop at brand new donors. You can do dedicated communications for monthly donors, those longtime loyal donors, lapsed donors, right? Kind of we miss you campaigns, maybe something like that. Prospects are getting something different than active donors are. The sky's the limit with segmentation, and the deeper you go, I think the more dividends you'll kind of glean from those efforts. Surveying, we talked about surveying. Don't let the technology be a barrier, right? You can get a SurveyMonkey account. Google Forms are free up into a point, I believe. If you're using Bloomerang, we got surveys in there, you're covered. But it was the number 4 thing, right, from that donor loyalty study. Ask them how you're doing communicating to them. Ask them about themselves. Why do you give? Why do you care about, the orangutan endangered population? Whatever that thing is, ask them. Just getting the survey, and I know we get a lot of surveys as consumers, but it's something inherently different about an organization that you're giving kind of your hard-earned dollars to, just out of the goodness of your own heart. Are we thanking you? Are we telling you the right stories? What are those things? So we've got all kinds of sample questions on our website if you want to kind of dip your toes into the water. And again, these can be segmented. You can have a brand new donor survey, a monthly donor survey, a lapsed donor survey we have that's really powerful, that kind of basically asks the same question that Adrian Sargent did in that survey, and it can maybe alert you to gaps perhaps in your communication process. Maybe we're thinking too slow, maybe our stories aren't on the right footing, maybe our appeals aren't hitting the mark. You may be able to take some of that data, of course, and you don't want to make any knee-jerk reactions from one person responding by any means, but could we just maybe some interesting A/B tests perhaps, or just kind of get you thinking about what it is you're doing. Online giving is an interesting one. I know I showed you the FEP research, but they're not the only people doing retention research. So is Target Analytics. And in their retention study, they look at retention rates by gift channel, which I think is kind of interesting. And it probably won't surprise you to see that donors who give offline typically have lower retention rates than people who give offline or who give through multiple channels. And my personal take on this is that when you give online, it can be a little transactional, right? It can be a little robotic, perhaps. So my challenge to you, or my homework to you, is maybe donate to yourself. Go to your website, click donate, give yourself $5. Use a company card if you got one, if that makes a difference, and look kind of critically at what those online donors are kind of presented with in those first even few seconds of donating. What does that thank you page look like? Does it say thank you? Does it tell stories? Does it kind of give donors something to do? What about that automatic email that goes out right after someone gives? Is it a nice acknowledgement, or is it kind of something scary like this where it's, a receipt, doesn't say thank you, it has kind of big red scary letters, what's going on there? Is it something that kind of looks like a receipt Or is it something that you could almost print and send in the mail because it's a pretty darn good looking thank you letter? You know, service recipient photos, nice donor centric language, telling the donor what comes next, right? That was the number 2 thing, but you can see here a tax letter with details of your gift will be sent to the address you provided next month. So telling them, hey, we're going to send you the next thing, don't worry. And then giving them something to do, you know, click on social media, go back to the website, watch a video, fill out a survey, look at upcoming events, right? You've got a captive audience there, right? They're on their computer, they're on their phone, keep them engaged, but say thank you, right? I think kind of the litmus test here is, could you print this automatic email and mail it? You know, keeping off all the kind of electronic things that would come off, obviously, like a social media button, that wouldn't make any sense, but the content of the letter itself. And oftentimes, you know, this stuff just goes uncustomized, right? There's kind of the out of the box settings in the software we use, but go in there, but look critically at it, because there may be opportunities to kind of warm those things up. And once you warm it up once, you're kind of done. You know, you can maybe let it ride for months or a year before you go back and revisit it. So just, you know, keeping in mind every touch point, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, can kind of add up and compound into an overall experience for the donor that you want to be positive for sure. Couple other ideas for segmentation before we wrap up here. We got about 10 minutes left, it looks like. You know, there are a couple of types of donors that have really low retention rates, even lower than that 20% rate. Memorial and peer-to-peer probably will not surprise you. These retention rates tend to be in the single digits. And that is not to discourage you from pursuing these channels. They are awesome, awesome channels, particularly peer-to-peer. I'm a huge believer in peer-to-peer. The cost of acquisition tends to be low as kind of a trade-off to the low retention rates. So again, these are people you might want to communicate to differently than people who are donating directly to you. Directly, I kind of use for lack of a better phrase. I think that the underlying thread here is that there's kind of a pass-through entity, right? Somebody is supporting someone else that has chosen your charity for that donation to go to, right? Your friend does a 5K, or your sister is doing a Facebook fundraiser for her birthday. They've chosen your charity, but the donor is probably mostly supporting that person and not you. So my recommendation, and something we've seen be kind of successful, is weave in that third party person. Maybe even have the thank you letter come from them. You know, dear Stephen, thanks so much for supporting my 5K last month. By the way, this is the charity that I chose to raise money for. You may not be aware of them. They do these great things. I would love for you to continue supporting them in the future. Rather than what usually happens is you just get a letter from that charity like, hey, thanks so much for the donation. It's kind of like, whoa, they may not even know who you are, remember that was the charity because they're just supporting their friend, or it was the charity that was chosen at the viewing at the funeral home. So don't assume these people know you or even really like you, right? Weave in that person, segment them out, and also don't worry about retaining them. I mean, I feel weird saying that, but I'm kind of the retention guy, right? But these are people that you can probably bless and release and not feel too badly about, but you want to retain the fundraiser, right? I see all the time people in Facebook groups kind of bemoaning that, oh geez, we haven't gotten the money, we don't get the contact information from Facebook. And I worry that all that angst and kind of energy should be directed positively towards the person who did the Facebook fundraiser. They deserve the thank you. I wouldn't worry too much about getting that guy who gave $5 their email address. Make sure that fundraiser feels really appreciated for doing that fundraiser, because you want them to go out next year on their birthday and do it again, or do it on Giving Tuesday or whatever. So just a couple of food for thought items on peer-to-peer there. One last thing that came from the FEP study, which isn't really related to retention too closely, but every year, more and more people give in Q4. I don't know why this is. The tax changes and the tax law doesn't seem to be swaying people from giving in the last quarter of the year. So just be aware, right? Don't just kind of do Giving Tuesday and get that holiday appeal out the door and think you're done. I know it's hard to kind of work during this time of year with the holidays for some people, but man, that week between Christmas and New Year's is always a juggernaut, and it increases every single year. And I'm always surprised to see it, but for whatever reason, people are just kind of have it ingrained to get that last minute gift in. So, speaking of retention, look at the people who haven't been retained yet. Maybe a special appeal for them. Maybe they've forgotten, maybe they're waiting, but you can be a little proactive there as well. But just, make sure your website's working that last week of the year, your online giving forms are working, because it just, every year, more and more people in Q4. And maybe it's because Giving Tuesday gets bigger every year, which is great. So there are some things happening that are kind of, juicing that along, but just be aware that that grows every single year, and that the tax change really didn't seem to have an effect on that. So that's it from me. We got maybe 5 minutes for questions, but segmentation, first-time donors, personal outreach, the phone calls, I cannot stress enough. And build those personas for your segments. And I think you can have some fun doing this as well. But shoot for an increase. What's your retention rate now? Hopefully you can calculate that pretty easily. And then can we get a 1% change, a 2% change? Can we do that for all those donor types? Not just the average rate, but maybe for first-time donors. And I think you'll see some fun things happen in terms of revenue increases from it. So all the research I shared, all the case studies and more, honestly, are on our website. It's all free. Don't have to be a customer to look at those things. We've also got some really cool case studies that really dive deep into people that were giving and doing really well during the early days of the pandemic. We got some cool case studies there. So watch those. You may glean some more insights there. And yeah, hopefully we can keep talking. If you're interested in Kindful, if you're interested in Bloomerang, reach out. We'd love to talk to you. And yeah, we can do some questions. So I'll mosey over to the question tab here. Let's see if I can get some things going on here. We got a cool question from, let's see, one from Jenny. Regarding retention rates, are you finding that undesignated giving increased, or are donors looking to make more impactful giving? So the designated gifts versus undesignated wasn't a filter in the FEP study, but that's an interesting idea. I will definitely pass that along to the researchers, because that would be definitely interesting to look at. Here's one from Heather. She may have anticipated my section on memorial giving, but works at a senior living community. A lot of the donors are memorial donors, and yeah, they have lower retention rates there. So yeah, Heather, you probably asked this before I got to that slide, but yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that those retention rates are lower, but I would try to weave in that family member in some way in the gift acknowledgement. I think that could be an interesting test for you. Let's see what else here. And we are going to send the slides in the recording, by the way. So if you had asked that, we got you covered here for sure. Here's a comment from Nicole. During COVID, we called every donor we had a phone number for. As soon as we received the gift, best year ever for donations and first-time donors. Nice, that's awesome, Nicole. I swear that was a real comment. I didn't feed that in there. This is one from Carolyn. Can you send a thank you email and a phone call? And should that email say be on the lookout for that phone call? Yeah, you can. Yes, you can call and send an email. So you can call and send a letter. You can call and send an email and send a letter. But if you do that, make sure they're kind of different. You don't want to just send a carbon copy of the email in letter form, right? Because they already got it. So a couple of things. If they give online, they're going to get that automatic email. So they got one touch point. And if you go in and kind of optimize your settings and warm that up, that'll be a nice piece. then you can call them if you get a phone number, right? And I think you could probably get a phone call made before a letter in the mail. So you might want to do the phone call first rather than sending a letter that takes a week and then in the letter saying, hey, we're going to call you. That may kind of slow things down. And if you call first and they answer and you have a conversation, you may be able to kind of decide, okay, do I want to send this person a letter? Do they seem affable? Do they seem like maybe they don't want to be bothered too much? You can kind of make that call. But you don't have to decide on one channel, right? There's absolutely no, and there's also no research to suggest that the channel of the gift, how they gave, is the channel you need to keep your subsequent communications in, right? Because if someone gives online, they may have given online because they saw your website on a piece of print material. Is that a print gift or is that an online gift, right? That's kind of an interesting question. But I think the main thing you should do is kind of let the opt-ins guide you. Did they give and give you a phone number? And was that phone number required or unrequired? If it was not required, which is probably something you want to do because you don't want to lock people out of giving if they don't want to give you their phone number. If it was not required, I would call that person. But yeah, you get an online gift receipt, a couple days later, a phone call, 3 to 5 days later, a thank you letter in the mail, and maybe a couple weeks they get an email with a survey. So multi-channel is good, basically, is kind of my short answer to that long answer that I just gave prior. So it's a little over time. I want to be respectful of folks. You guys have been so awesome to hang out for over an hour. I didn't get to all the questions, but email me. I promise if you email me, I will respond to your question. So my email address is there. Connect with me on LinkedIn because I'm always sharing new research, not just this one that I went over, but things that come out throughout the year or that I see that I like to share. So I'd love for you to connect with me. I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. Just look for Bloomerang Steven. I think you'll get to me. But hopefully this is valuable. Hopefully you got some takeaways and some nuggets, maybe some things you can try. And if you try something, let me know. I'd love to hear how it goes, even if it doesn't work. That's cool too. So we'll call it a day there. Like I said, you'll get the slides and the recording here real soon. And I'd love to hear from you if I didn't get to your question. So thanks for listening, and stay safe, stay healthy out there. If you're in the South, I hope you're doing okay with those storms. We're thinking about you. And hopefully we'll see you again on the next Kindful webinar. So thanks again, and have a good rest of your day.